Hey, what is up guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to Gran Turismo 7. 2024 is finally coming to an end, and that brings me to my final roundup video of the year, my Gran Turismo 7 2024 review. In this video, I will go through every single one of the last 12 months, going through every single update and its content, and in the end, give it a single ranking out of 10. In total, towards the end of the video, I will round up the scores and look where GT7 has really been at in 2024. I'll also have a bit of a bonus section at the end as well, looking at some of the stuff that may have improved or declined throughout the entire year of 2024 that doesn't necessarily sit into a single update. So let's begin at the start of the year. So after almost 3 months, January 2024 brought GT7's first update of the year. Now in terms of the cars themselves, it was a mixed bag. We got the Genesis Gran Berlinetta VGT concept. This was announced at the World Series Finals 2023 and was free to all players who entered that viewers campaign. So this one really wasn't that bad and was useful at an 800 pp grinding level. However, the Bulgari VGT instantly became a $4,000 DLC locked away for an entire month for watch owners only, and the only real world car we got for this update was the Suzuki Jimny XC 2018, or the K car variant. And unfortunately it left a bit of a sour taste in everyone's mouth, as in reality we only ended up with 2 cars and the only real car of the bunch was really not that great. However, it did bring along one of only 2 brand new menu books this year in the form of the Jimny Cup, of course catering to the brand new Jimny. Now in terms of the menu book itself, it really wasn't too bad and was very overall a varied book. However, there was a key issue. It was done and dusted within about 15 minutes. Now the first event of the bunch was at Willow Springs on the Horse Thief Mile, giving that track layout its first actual in-game event. The next was on the dirt at Sardinia Windmills, and the third was in the snow at Lake Louise Short Track. So again, a very varied menu book, but way too short. Now thankfully these weren't the only events to come with the update. We did get a couple of VGT trophy events. The first was at Monza, which was just far too easy and felt a bit of a throwaway one. The second at Tokyo Expressway South counterclockwise was much more fun, looked really good in the sort of midnight setting to it, and overall was definitely the best of the entire 5 events. However, that's not saying much. In terms of extra menus, we got extra menu 34, which was Nissan Motorsports, probably one of the better ones of the year just for the cars we had to collect, like the Super Silhouette, R92, and of course the GTR GT500. We also had extra menu 35, which was Dodge. This featured a bunch of cool cars from Dodge like the Charger and Viper, and of course the Demon. Now in terms of my highlight of this update, it was actually the engine swaps, which gave this update an entire boost. Some of my personal favorites was the XJ220 with the XJ09 V12, the LFA swap for the Alphard. That was a fantastic and great fun engine, especially for just having a bunch of laughs with it. Now in terms of another highlight for me, that was the 190E getting the AMG GT3 engine swap. You're probably seeing a theme here. Having the ability to turn a road car into a race car is always a great time. So overall, the January 2024 update was again a weird one. It was really a mixed bag. It was incredibly disappointing for the vehicles alone, and the fact that one was locked behind a $4,000 paywall for a month, as well as the events just not being that good. At least there was 5 of them, which you'll see a trend a little later on where that massively dips down for a long time. And in terms of the engine swaps, that was absolutely the highlight of the update. Those were fantastic, and those alone really boosted up my fun factor for the entire month of January into the beginning of February with this game. So for me, this was just a 5 out of 10 kind of mid update, which was only really improved by the engine swaps alone. Next up, let's move into February. Now unfortunately you're going to start seeing a trend here where the updates really drop down, but at least it was 2 on the trot. Now in terms of the cars, the first one we got was the Audi TTS Coupe from 2009. I don't think anybody asked for this kind of mid-generation TT, however it did have a very cool DTM kit. We also got the Mitsubishi Lancer Evo 9 MR GSR from 2006. This came 4th in my top 10 cars of the year list, and it was fantastic, a great tuner car and a really good runner that was made even better the month after. And we also got the plucky Renault 4. I love this quirky little car, but unfortunately Polyphony never ever went back to give it an engine swap and make it useful at any of the typical PP ratings, so unfortunately many people forgot about this one. We also did get the full inclusion of the Bulgari VGT, the car ending its meme status as a $4,000 DLC at this point. Now in terms of the events themselves, this may have been the worst lineup of events that we've ever had in GT7 history, especially in terms of 2024, for a very good reason. That is because this kind of started the trend of only 3 events per update. Now the first one that we got was the Japanese Clubman Cup 550 at WeatherTech Raceway Laguna Seca. We then also got another 3-lap sprint, this time it was at Tsukuba Circuit in the Sunday Cup Classic, of course aimed at the Renault 4, which on the hardest difficulty couldn't beat the event as a standard vehicle and actually required upgrades, which I did kind of find quite funny. Now in terms of the third event, this was the longest one of the bunch. This was a 3-lap sprint at Suzuka Circuit on the full layout for the European Clubman Cup 600. That took a total of around about 6 to 7 minutes maximum at that PP level. Now honestly, a total event time for all 3 was around about 10 minutes. It was absolutely pathetic. Now in terms of the extra menu books, this also got toned down for the February update. So in January we got 2 of these, in Feb we ended up with 1. This was extra menu book number 36, just purely called Lamborghini. It required you to collect the likes of the Moira, the Countach and the Aventador to be able to complete them. It was a very standard extra menu, nothing to really write home about there. Now in terms of the weekly challenges, we did actually get a key change to them this month. Originally they were on a Thursday and this got changed over to a Friday with a missed week during February. Now in terms of the engine swaps this time around, there weren't as many of them. I believe there was only 5 in total, so that also got slashed in half. The highlight of these was probably the LS7 BRZ swap for the GTR to make it a drift missile, and we also finally got a bit of power output for the likes of the Corolla in the form of the 2JZ. However, that was really about it. Probably one of the weaker months in terms of the engine swaps. So the Feb 2024 update was a massive disappointment, and I have to admit, really the only redeeming thing for this was probably the inclusion of the Evo 9. That was a car that a lot of people wanted to the game, and thankfully it did live up to expectations and absolutely, exceeded them, especially in the following month in the form of its rally car engine swap, which allowed it to basically turn into a full-blown race car. Of course, in the end, the Evo 9 would end up 4th on my top 10 list of 2024, so for me, that was absolutely a fantastic addition, but the rest of the update, pretty terrible, and perhaps one of the most notorious updates of the year. Even the rest of the cars really weren't that exciting, just due to the fact that Polyphony never ever went back and added engine swaps to 2 cars that really did need them, in the form of the TTS Coupe and of course the Renault 4. In terms of the event, it was absolutely terrible, at 3 events taking a total of about 10 minutes to complete and nothing of really else to note. So when it comes to this update, it is purely the Evo 9 alone giving this a nice bump in score, but for me it was only a 4 out of 10 at best. Let's move into March then, and we would see a bit of an improvement here, and in fact it will be a massive one over what we saw the month prior. Now in terms of the cars, this was perhaps one of the better lineups of the year. We had the likes of the Audi R8 Coupe V10 Plus. This car exceeded all expectations and came 8th on my overall list. We also had the Lamborghini Urus. A lot of people really wanted this car, but honestly I'm just not a fan. For me, Lamborghinis are pure supercars, and I'm really not bothered by big bulky 4-wheel drive things. We also had the return of a legend, the Toyota GT1, finally returning in all its glory. This for me was the second best car of the year. I really love this thing. I spent a lot of hours with this car throughout the entirety of 2024 once it was added, so for me this car alone makes this a fantastic update. Now in terms of the other stuff, we got an extra menu book, which was extra menu 37 and Jaguar. It just included a bunch of very cool Jags, the E-Type, the XJ220 and the XJR9. Now in terms of the events, Once again, it was very weak with only 3 of them. However, I did find myself having fun with them. The first was a European Clubman Cup 600. Now this was hosted at Blue Moon Bay Speedway, and I think because it's a track that doesn't get much love, I actually found myself having fun here. The next was the High Speed Ring with the Schwarzwald League. This was a 5-lap race around the reverse layout. However, again, it really catered towards the Audi's strengths, so I think overall, after replaying it a few times, I did actually have a good time with this one. Yes, the first 2 events were quite short, but the last one, the 24-hour Le Mans Racing Circuit, or Le Mans WTC 900, of course catering to the Toyota GT1, may have been one of the more interesting at around about 40 minutes to complete, but unfortunately this event fell flat on its face. There was no such thing as variable weather or proper time of day. It was just a 40-minute race around Le Mans, catching up to a bunch of very fast vehicles, and really that was it. This was a huge disappointment for an event that could have been incredibly well paying and incredibly well thought out. Now, in terms of something else that got fixed during this update, the European Clubman Cup 600 at the Nordschleife actually got a payout increase. Originally, this was sat at around about 20,000 credits for at least a year and a half, and thankfully Polyphony did go back and finally change this to at least a decent enough payout at 125,000 credits. Now, in terms of the engine swaps, it was all about the Evos for this update, and the standout for me was the Evo Final Group B swap for the Lancer Evo 9, which of course got added the prior update and finally allowed this car to be a full-blown race car, especially with that incredible fuel efficiency. And overall, the rest of the Evo swaps as well that came with this update were fantastic. So in terms of the March 2024 update, I would say this was probably one of the better ones of the year. No, it wasn't perfect, but all of the cars really served the purpose. The Audi for me was fantastic, the Toyota GT1 is a certified Gran Turismo banger, and the Lamborghini Urus really wasn't that bad, although I didn't really use it that much, I'll be totally honest. I'm not that interested in that. The events themselves were decent. I did enjoy the longer event at Le Mans, but it did feel rather quite uninspired, and I think because of the cars themselves, the first 2 shorter events were actually much more enjoyable than they probably actually are. Now, in terms of the rest of the update, the Evo swaps were fantastic, so to me it really wasn't that bad whatsoever, and was probably the best update of the year, at least so far. So when it comes to the other 2024 updates, for me this was a solid 7 out of 10 for this year. Of course, that's going to move me into April, and things would completely fall off a cliff for this month. Perhaps the worst update of the entirety of 2024 was this month's. It was the inclusion of Skoda, which sounded exciting apart from it was an EV VGT car, and unfortunately we've never had another Skoda since, so that was a waste of a license. We got the Afeela. We knew this car was coming, but unfortunately it came alongside another EV. It was given out entirely for free by Polyphony, and people still didn't want it. And probably the only single saving grace of this update, the Chevy Chevelle, which was absolutely beautiful. I really do love this model in game, and I'm very happy to see it. Unfortunately, it would be the only good thing about this update. Now, in terms of the car itself, it would also be the only car that had any kind of use whatsoever, but unfortunately when it came to performance, the tyres that were used made this pretty difficult to drive. Now, in terms of the extra menu books, these continued once again with extra menu number 38, Ferrari 12-cylinder engines. Again, you were just picking up a bunch of Ferraris there. Now, in terms of events, there was only 3 of them. Of course there was, this became a trend at this point. So we had Grand Valley Highway 1, which was of course a Vision Gran Turismo trophy event, and thankfully would be the final one of the year. It was actually pretty good fun in the Skoda. The Trial Mountain Circuit Reverse hosted the American FR Challenge 550. This was catering towards the Chevelle, and I really did enjoy this one, but again, it was a typical throwaway event that I probably won't really go back and do. And then we had the Alsace Village Reverse Japanese Clubman Cup 550. Of course, this was aimed at the Afeela and was pretty boring overall. So really, the events here were incredibly weak. Maybe not as weak as the ones prior in February, but definitely up there. In terms of the engine swaps, this started the stupid trend of drift engine swaps in race cars, as well as like really high-end road engines in race cars. So they have absolutely no use in game whatsoever, apart from maybe going 300 miles an hour. So for me, April of 2024 was absolutely arguably the most notorious and worst update of the year. Of course, it got leaked early, and the whole hype around the Skoda VGT for it to be an EV in the end was just terrible. And the fact that they bought Skoda in terms of the license and then haven't used it ever since. I mean, what's the point? What's going on here, Polyphony? I just don't understand it. This update really frustrates me, and I really hated this month. So if it wasn't for the Chevelle being added, this would be a 1 out of 10 update. So I gave it a pretty nice score of 2 out of 10, I'm not gonna lie. Let's move into May then. Thankfully things would pick up at this point in time, but it would be the end of the consistent updates for the year. 5 in a row, and that was it. So in terms of this update, we finally got Volvo returning to Gran Turismo 7. They came along with 2 vehicles. The first was the V40, which I don't think anybody asked for, but the second, this absolute legend of a Swedish battle tank. Of course, I'm talking about the Volvo 240 SE, which of course got added with this update. It was a fantastic addition, and again recently did get a drift engine swap. In terms of the other vehicles, they were pretty damn good. We got the R31 GT SR, which was a great car and one a lot of people really wanted. We also got the inclusion of 2 pretty cool Hondas. Once again, we had the tuning legend, the Civic EG, finally made its full return to the game. Of course, a year prior getting the RCR Garage Civic, there was a lot of hope for this one, and thankfully the Gran Turismo Classic starter car did eventually return. On top of that though, we got my favourite car of the year, the Honda NSX GT500 from the year 2000, finally completing the holy trinity of JGTC machinery. This one was fantastic. Now in terms of the extra menus, we've probably got the highlight of the year for them, which was Races of Japanese GT, which required you to get the holy trinity of the NSX, GTR and the Supra. Now in terms of the events, unfortunately it was again pretty lackluster. So we got a European Sunday Cup 400. This was at Kyoto Driving Park on the Yamagiwa layout. Again, it was a 2-lap sprint. We then got perhaps the most disappointing one. This was aimed at the EG Civic. It was a 2-lap sprint of Autopolis on the short course, so it really only took a couple of minutes to get this done, but did look cool with all the tuned up Hondas there. We then got the Lake Maggiore West layout for the Japanese FR Challenge 450, of course aimed at the Skyline GTS-R. It really wasn't too bad, but again a bit of a throwaway one. And then of course in terms of the surprise event of the year for me, honestly, this was the WTC 800 at Circuit de St. Croix on the A layout. This is a layout that had never been featured for any of the events in GT7 and actually made a refreshing change. I really enjoyed this one, much more than I thought I would. I'm not usually a fan of this track, but overall I was impressed. I had a lot of fun here with my Honda. Now in terms of the engine swaps, they really weren't great. There was only 5 of them. For me, the highlight of the bunch was the B18C Integra, which was a day 1 swap for the Civic, so really enjoyed that one. Now a really weird side note for the update was that they actually made damage changes to the EVs, and I'm not really sure what they changed, but really, who actually cares? So the May 2024 update was certainly the best one that we'd had so far. Now all of these cars were fantastic. Now unlike when Skoda got added and they got completely forgotten about, at least with Volvo we did get some road going cars. The V40 may have been a little bit uninspiring, but the 240 SE, that was a seriously cool car and I love that thing. Now in terms of both of the Hondas, the EG is of course a tuning icon. It's a really much loved little time attack car, especially over in Japan and stuff like that, and I really enjoy it, especially because I use it so much in the classic Gran Turismo games. And of course with the RCR Garage Civic coming in game the year prior, it only made sense that the EG would turn up and we could do our own thing with it. We then of course got the NSX GT500. That for me was my car of the year. It's fantastic, it sounds beautiful, and the performance is just top notch. And of course we had the Nissan Skyline GTS-R, which I think is just a great car all round, so really happy to see that car. And in fact nearly all of these cars but one made it in some shape or form to my top 10 cars of the year list, so Great to see all of these in a single update. For me, it was top notch for the cars. Events not so much, so again, kind of do with that what you wish. Extra menus I couldn't really care about, although it was probably the better one of the year. And unfortunately, the engine swaps were a bit of a letdown. There was only 5 of them once again. I don't get why they started the year putting 10 in the game and then dropped down to 5, and it thankfully would change a little bit later on, but there was some good ones in there, so they weren't absolutely terrible like the month prior. So for me, this was an 8 out of 10 update if we're scaling it to this year's ranking. I thought this was a solid one and the cars were absolutely fantastic. So let's move on to June of 2024 then. And unfortunately, this is where the steam would run out. So with no update in June, July would come along and pick things up where the rest of the updates left off. This time with the biggest update of the year. Now in terms of the cars, there were 6 of them. The first of these cars was the Genesis X Grand Racer VGT Concept, a Group 1 race car, of course originally based on the VGT that came earlier in the year. The second of the cars was the Wraith RGT 4.2 from 2016. I really enjoyed this one and I think it looks absolutely fantastic. So for the third car of the update, this would be the Ferrari 430 Scuderia, and whilst yes, it's a bit of an older Ferrari model, I do feel like this one kind of goes hand in hand with the Gran Turismo series as a whole, so really was a much needed addition. We then also got the Lamborghini Gallardo LP560-4. Mind you, I'm not too much of a fan of the Gallardo in general, but it was a nice little addition anyway. The fifth car of the update would be the iconic Subaru Impreza rally car from 1998, of course driven by the late great Colin McRae. And of course the final car of the update would be the BMW M3 from 1997. This is a tuner icon for a lot of people, and I think its addition was really welcome. Now speaking of tuning, we actually got some new aftermarket wheels. This is the first post-launch bunch of, I guess, customized DLC that we've actually had to GT7. It was Pocal and some extra work wheels. Now honestly, they were quite a nice addition. Now in terms of the tyres, of course, we did get the physics update with 1.49, and we also had the whole Michelin rebrand of every single tyre in the game. So anything from comfort, sports, and of course racing were all now branded Michelin tyres. In terms of other tuning options, of course, we did get the typical engine swaps. It was back up to 10 for this update, and my personal favourite of the bunch was the RB26, which was now swappable into the Skyline GTS-R. Of course, as always with these updates, we did end up getting brand new events. Now, I'll talk more about the new track in a minute, but we did end up getting 3 brand new ones at Eigen Noordsvond. Now, the first of these was the European Sunday Cup 500. The second was the Jimny Cup. Both of those very short kind of throwaway events, which is a massive shame. However, the best of the bunch for the brand new track would be the World Rally Challenge. This was a 12-lap race with tyre and fuel on, of course, around the rally cars in game. I think this was excellent, and of course it was catering towards the brand new Subaru. I definitely enjoyed this one. Again, though, I do feel like it could have had more built upon it through the rest of the year. But in terms of what came with this update, I feel like the rally event kind of made up for the lackluster first 2. Now, thankfully, we did actually get extra events alongside these first 3. Now, the others were the Ferrari Circuit Challenge. This got a race at Monza, of course catering towards the inclusion of the 430 Scuderia. Overall, it was a kind of forgettable event, but it only feels fitting that the Ferraris have an event over at Monza, so totally made sense in that point. Now, the other one was the Michelin Raceway Road Atlanta. This was for the WTC 600. Now, this was supposed to cater towards the Roof and the Lamborghini. However, it was a very forgettable event, unfortunately. The AI balance here was just way off. Now, this month would also see the launch of consistent Sophie content throughout the rest of the year. So in terms of new track additions, there were 2 of them. It was the 24-hour layout of the Nürburgring. We also got Lake Mazur as well. Now, for me, this one was just nowhere near as good. That 24-hour run with Sophie is fantastic. I do recommend trying that one out. But in terms of the Sophie content, this will be a consistent thing now for the rest of the year and all of the updates. Now, of course, I cannot talk about update 1.49 without mentioning the inclusion of the one and only track for the year, Eigen Noordsvond. I think this one took a lot of people by surprise, myself included. I would have genuinely thought something like maybe Midfield or Autumn Ring would have made a return before something like Eiger. here. This was of course a very iconic track from the HD era, so of course from, you know, the HD concept game, Gran Turismo 5 and of course Gran Turismo 6. Now in terms of the return of the track, it was rather quite disappointing. It's a very short track if it's on its standard layouts, and that's exactly what we got. Standard way and reverse. There was none of the extra layouts included, and they are still yet to return. So unfortunately this track kind of fell away quite quickly. Yes, it's beautiful in VR. Yes, it's great to run in time trial and some certain custom races, or of course drift trials, but when it comes to the on-track racing, it's just not very good. Now of course we also got the big physics overhaul for 1.49 for better or for worse. I personally am not a huge fan of them. I think at first I did really enjoy it, but the more I played GT7, you know, as the physics have been changed, the less I've kind of liked them. I do prefer them pre 1.49 than, you know, post 1.49. And of course I cannot talk about the physics changes without talking about the physics glitch, which involved cars absolutely rocketing off into space, and you could really see the actual boundaries of pretty much every track in the game. It was ridiculous fun. Honestly, if you didn't try this, you really missed out. Unfortunately, Polyphony did patch it out quite quickly, so it was ended very quick. However, I felt like that might have just been the most memorable time period for Gran Turismo fans, just because it really brought the community together to just see that silly side of Gran Turismo that has always been there. I know there's a bunch of people that sit there and want a really serious racer out of Gran Turismo, but let's be honest, it's always had its ridiculous quirky side, especially when it comes to glitches, and this just felt like a return to form. So I really felt like 1.49 did a good job of bringing the community back together, and obviously it was the biggest update as well, so we did see more players returning than we had for the rest of the updates. I mean, it's kind of obvious when we rank it against the rest of the updates of this year that this would come out with a 9 out of 10. It wasn't perfect, but it was pretty damn good. Now, in terms of August though, would things carry on with the momentum of 1.49? Well, okay, but summer's winding down at this point. Surely in September we will get an update that will be fantastic. So surely things will change in October. Surely there would be an update, and well, yeah, you'd be kind of right. There was an update in October. Now, in terms of the cars, it would be the Mitsubishi Lancer Evolution A MR GSR from 2004, one of my personal favorite editions of the year. Very similar to the 9 though. We also had the last hurrah for the R35 GTR in the form of the Premium Edition T-Spec 2024, perhaps the best looking GTR that I've ever seen roll off the production line. And of course we had the notorious Toyota Hiace van DX from 2016. However, I did really like this one with the engine swap and fully stripped out, so no complaints. We did actually get our second and final menu book of the year with this update in the form of the Evolution Meeting, and for me this was one that just had to happen. Of course, catering to all generations of Evo, we had the likes of Kyoto Driving Park, Monza and Colorado Springs, so again nice and varied with 2 tarmac events and of course the dirt event at Colorado. So not too bad overall, not the best, again still very short, a little bit like the Jimny Cup. Now in terms of the events though, there would actually be more. So we had the Nissan GTR Cup. This was at Circuit de St. Croix. It was actually quite an enjoyable event overall and really did make use of the T-Spec's strength, so no complaints from me on that one. And we also actually had an addition for the Sunday Cup. This is the first post-launch Sunday Cup event ever to GT7, and it was actually great to see some of the more, you know, daily driver cars really get highlighted here with this event. One thing Gran Turismo has always done well as a driving game is just taking a break from race cars and going back to the more kind of daily grocery getters, and I feel like it was fantastic. Now in terms of the extra menus, we did get one of these as well. This was extra menu number 41, which was Audi. Of course, this featured a bunch of legendary Audi cars and the T2 Coupe for some reason. Now the content for Sophie did continue with this update, maybe not as good as the one in July, but we did get Brands Hatch Grand Prix circuit, which was Sophie compatible, as well as Dragon Trail on the seaside layout and the Death Chicane. Now this update did actually see the inclusion of double engine swaps for cars, so take this Sylvia for example, it can now have the LS7 BRZ engine in it as well as the SR20, so this does really open up the options for engine swaps and single cars in the future. This is definitely a feature that went really underappreciated, and I'm absolutely glad to have it. Having multiple multiple different options for cars is always fantastic, and that would really round out the content for the October update. So it's a bit of a strange one for October. I feel like it came out of nowhere. I think a lot of people expected this at the end of September and it didn't happen. And then all of a sudden we're into October and GT7 gets updated. So it really caught a lot of people by surprise, myself included. And I did originally expect it to be a bigger update considering a couple of months away, but unfortunately that wasn't the case. However, in terms of the update itself, for a smaller update, I do feel like this was one of the better ones for the year, and I did find myself putting a good few hours into it, so I did get a lot of enjoyment out of this. I thought the cars were actually very, very good from a tuning perspective and just kind of doing more with them. So in terms of those, they were fantastic. We also saw a bit of an update to the weekly challenges. So earlier on in the year we got the JGTC events added in, and they disappeared for a bit, and all of a sudden DTM appeared. Now at this point it would then spawn the rotation of DTM, JGTC, and of course Group C as well on a free weekly basis. They just seem to naturally rotate as a special event, so not too bad. For me, this was a bit of a 6 out of 10 update. A bit better than a mid score, definitely not terrible, but definitely not the best. Let's move on then to November of 2024, and this would be the final update of the year, unfortunately. So in terms of the cars, we got the Ford Escort RS Cosworth. This was a fantastic addition, and I think one that caught many people by surprise. Of course, this thing having a huge cult following, it was great to see it in GT7. In terms of another one that I don't think anybody expected, the Mercedes W196 made its appearance, a 1950s Formula 1 racer, of course driven by the likes of Moss and Fangio. We also had the Porsche 911 Turbo S 992 from 2020, also giving the 992 its second different model in game, so it really did update the Porsche lineup quite nicely. We also got the Mission X from 2023, which, whilst it looks absolutely fantastic, was my worst car of the year, and that thing can just go ahead and get itself in the bin. We also got a second Jimny for some reason. I think this one caught a lot of people by surprise. The Jimny Sierra made its inclusion with this update, just a bit beefier and better than the XC. Now we did also get some new wheel additions. These were from American Racing. We also had Motegi Racing as well, get a bunch of brand new wheels in game. KMC Wheels also got a brand new batch, and we also got a new wheel manufacturer, of course in the form of Rotiform, which got a few new wheels added, as well as being added to the game in decals, so not bad for custom content. We also got a bunch more engine swaps. Of course, my favourite from this bunch was the LS7 BRZ swap for the Volvo 240 SE Estate. I feel like this one was well overdue. It's very, very cheap and can make this thing an absolute drift missile, and there's nothing funnier than drifting an estate car, especially the size of the 240 SE. We also got new extra menus in the form of Ferrari Special. Of course, this was for the likes of the F40, F50, and of course the Enzo. Nothing to really write home about. Now in terms of the events, this would be the most disappointing part of this update. We only got 3 of them, even though there was 5 cars included. One of them was for the Jimny Cup. We also got one for the Porsche Cup. This was at Raceway Laguna Seca, and unfortunately the Mission X cannot run in any of these, so that was mainly for the 992 or the Turbo S. In terms of the third event, this would probably be the best of the bunch. Thankfully Mount Panorama did get a new event in the form of the Race of Turbo Sports Cars. This was a 5-lap sprint race, and I did really, really enjoy this one, and that would be the lot in terms of standard events to GT7 for update 1.54. Now in terms of the Sophie content, this would continue to include new tracks. We did get one at Tokyo Expressway on the east clockwise layout. Not really much to write home here. It's the kind of home of GT7 grinding for 600 pp cars, so if you know it, you know it. We also had Trial Mountain on the full course. This one absolutely made sense to do, and it was great to run here. So in terms of the content, I would honestly have to admit it was a bit disappointing. When I saw 5 new cars and only 3 new events, I kind of expected, you know, the worst here, and I feel like that was the case. The cars were actually great, apart from the Porsche. That thing is horrible, but apart from that, they were pretty good inclusions that had many different ways to run them, but only 3 events was pretty damn insulting. However, obviously I cannot talk about update 1.54 without talking about the main meat of it, which was the PS5 Pro update. Now this was supposed to happen day 1, and it didn't happen for whatever reason. It would actually be a couple of weeks later. So of course eventually it did drop, and GT7 was looking absolutely beautiful as always. That was never in doubt, and thankfully the biggest surprise of this update would be the PSVR 2 update, which combined with a PS5 Pro was the best it's ever been. And I'd recommend, if you are a serious PSVR 2 player, go ahead and do it on a PS5 Pro. For me, that is one of the best experiences I have ever had in gaming, period. So from that perspective, this update was fantastic. But like I mentioned, the content was just all over the place, and it just honestly wasn't good enough. I definitely feel like this was a missed opportunity for a brand new track. I feel like honestly it would have been the best time to do one for the second track of the year, alongside this update of course with the PS5 Pro, to really show off what they have done. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case, and I feel like in the end 1.54 did fall kind of flat. In the end, I feel like this update really missed the mark. So close to the holiday period, and of course trying to sell the new console, this could have been fantastic for racers. Now in terms of December, we didn't actually get another content update for the rest of this year, but we did get my first GT. So now it's time for my final thoughts on the year of 2024 and Gran Turismo as a whole. Did it sink or did it swim? Well, honestly, I have to say I have massively mixed feelings about this year for GT7. On one hand, we did receive some fantastic cars and some great content. However, I constantly feel that Polyphony take one step forward and two steps back. If we look at the year as a whole, it really started off incredibly consistent from, of course, January until May, and it really did build up a lot of hype for the game. Unfortunately, after missing June and July bringing such a big update and so many changes, it kind of just dropped off the face of the earth, with the October update being so small, and then of course November eventually rolling around, and the only thing of note really being the PS5 Pro update and PSVR 2. For any other players, I can imagine they were probably done in that update within inside about half an hour, and unfortunately the fantastic cars that have been constantly coming along still don't have necessarily many places to run them, which is a continuing shame for the game. Now of course 2024 also saw the launch of my first Gran Turismo, which basically brought the Gran Turismo for boys concept to life after many years of being kind of shelved. So it was kind of great to see. However, I think a lot of people were expecting this to be really nostalgic, which it kind of advertised itself as originally, and it just wasn't. It was just a watered down and different kind of demo for GT7. However, I would say the 18 reward cars for the sake of an hour was genuinely worth it, so I did get some enjoyment from that. However, on a whole, Gran Turismo 7 still has the constant same problems as it did in 2023, and also on top of that, for some people the physics are now worse, so it is really difficult to give it a true rating for the year other than all over the place. Whilst we do have confirmation of a January 2025 update, so we will see some type of content going into the new year, I feel like Polyphony really need to knuckle down on getting those core issues such as the economy and usefulness for the cars really ironed out in 2025 and make this game as great as it could be with all the content now here. And with that, 2024 for the channel comes to an end. I will be back tomorrow launching a brand new series to kick off 2025, so feel free to join me for that one. But in terms of 2024, it's been my biggest and best year so far, so I want to give a huge thank you to you guys for making that entirely possible. Have a great new year guys, take care, peace.